Hello, and welcome back to another week of the Mindful Mastery Livecast series. The skills we all need sometimes when stress gets high and emotions strong. And holy cow, there is a lot of stress and strong emotions out there right now. Are you feeling stressed, strong emotions, or burnt out, which is our topic this week, which may be timely or not so timely? We'll talk about that too. So if you're feeling stressed, strong emotions, or you're just new to the group, leave me a comment in the comment section so I know you're here. I like to know you're here. And of course, bring your questions and comments because that helps us give you the information you need. The whole purpose of these live casts is to empower you with the skills you need for self-discovery and emotional self-care. We're talking to the best of the best in the field of psychology and related fields so you can sort of demystify this process of psychotherapy, what excellent therapy looks like, and most importantly, how you can best take care of yourself. So we'll be giving you at least one skill every week so you can be your best on your journey of mastering adulthood. So today, we're thrilled to announce that we have Dr. Debbie Sorensen, and she is a Harvard Ph.D., awesome expert in the field of stress. She's been practicing helping people manage burnout and self-care and taking better care of themselves for a long time at VAs and other hospitals and institutions. She's going to tell you all about that good stuff. But also, she's the genius co-founder of the very popular podcast, Psychologists Off The Clock. And we're thrilled to have her here to share her expertise here with us. So tee up those questions. We're going to bring her right on. And here she is. Hi, Dr. Sorensen. Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Laura, thank you for having me on.
Right.
Right. It feels important.
Yeah, it feels important to me too.
Yeah.
So we hope that the people out there find it important too. I just want to give a shout out. Hi, Ramon. Thank you for joining us. Kiana, Lisa, Ruben, of course. Thanks, guys, for showing up. And if you guys are finding these skills helpful, if you find our talks helpful, we hope that you will follow us at Mindful Mastery here on Facebook to get the live casts and announcements, or you can always get the edited and cleaned up, sanitized versions over on my YouTube page, or sign up for the Mindful Mastery Skills blog at mindfulmastery.com. So Debbie, tell us a little bit about your work and why it's so meaningful and it's one of your values.
Yeah, so I came about this I was thinking about it from three different angles. One is that I spent many years working in healthcare as a psychologist on a medical team where I worked with caregivers who were experiencing burnout and medical professionals, which have very high rates of burnout.
Yeah.
My coworkers, my own self at times. I also, as a psychologist, there's a lot of emotional demand to our work, and I'm a parent, and so I think I had just a lot of experience with my own burnout in various contexts in my life. And then more recently, that's been an area of focus in my therapy practice. So I work with a lot of professionals, healthcare providers, caregivers who are burned out, parents who are burned out, et cetera. So I've really kind of honed that as something that I'm able to use to help other people. And so it's an interest that's come to me from a lot of different angles.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about how do you help people sort of negotiate that process of recognizing that they're burnt out, but wanting to stay committed to their values?
But I would say that it's a multi-pronged approach that I use, starting with really the context of taking a look at what's happening for the person and what are the demands on them. So we know that when people are experiencing burnout, it's usually because they're doing something meaningful. Burnout happens in meaningful roles like work, caregiving, school, etc. People just get burnt out sometimes.
And sometimes I'm curious though, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm curious though, can people not get burnt out could it not be the opposite, that you get burnt out because you belong somewhere else and the meaning, or is it just because the salience of the value is sort of fading? And what do you?
No, I think that's possible. There's some research about this, that sometimes it's more of a disconnect, just feeling unfulfilled. So for often it's a meaningful role where you're feeling like I care about this and I'm just exhausted. I think exhaustion is one of the main hallmarks of burnout. There are times though when people feel burnout because they're just missing that meaning in their life, or they're feeling unappreciated, or they feel like they don't have enough control over their situation. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. But usually there is at least a sense of, I care about this, even embedded in that, right? Like if you're kind of like, my work isn't really fulfilling me, I'm not feeling that, there's like a desire there, which to me reflects caring. It reflects that it does matter to you. And sometimes I think that might be what the emotional pain is about, is that you're feeling disconnected from what's meaningful to you. And disconnection is another hallmark of burnout. So, and often I will take a look with people on what are some of what's going on, what's happening, because sometimes we want to help the person adjust and be resilient and learn skills, but we also sometimes have to acknowledge that sometimes people are in situations that are really not great for them, not helpful, and something about the situation might be contributing as well.
Right. So is there a way that maybe you can give people a tip that they can sort of decide in their own minds, is it because I'm burnt out because I'm no longer connected to the value, and I'm doing valued work but I'm not connected enough to the value, versus this isn't a value anymore, or I'm doing work that's not related to my values? And how do you help people figure that out maybe for themselves?
That's a great question. I think sometimes values work takes some soul searching. You have to start with, what are my values? What's meaningful to me? When do I feel fulfilled? What's missing? And partly to do that, I think we just have to clarify what are our values, but sometimes we also just really have to tune in to our experience, right? So are you feeling vitality? Are you feeling longing? Like, is there something that's missing from, if you're feeling a sense of longing, that there's something out there that you're wanting but you're not getting it, I'd pay attention to that. And
yeah, I say that too. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I would also pay attention to, like, do you have vitality at times? And if so, when are those times? Maybe it was a couple years ago. But just kind of looking through and thinking about when you have felt, I think you can kind of feel sometimes that something's off, and sometimes you can feel like, yes, this really resonates for me. Deep inside, I know this feels meaningful. This matters to me.
Right, exactly. We, as Stephen Hayes says, we hurt where we care where we hurt. And that's why these efforts to avoid, suppress, and control our emotions can backfire, right? Because some people get really good at not caring, right? Or being overregulators, as I call them. So yeah, what you're talking about is what I call the aha moment. So some people will say, no, but I'm so upset about this. But actually that means that you care about it. And that's a good mile. That tells us. Well, actually, tell us a little bit. Why don't you tell us, what does burnout look like? What does it tend to how does it show up in the room?
So the official definition has a few parts, and let me just make sure I get all of them here. So exhaustion, or just like less energy than usual. And I think we've all probably felt this at times when you're just like, I just can't do it right now. I'm exhausted. I'm worn out. I've got nothing left to give. But this would be more the case of where it's chronic, right? So you're feeling like that every day in this particular, it's just really a struggle. You're just drained. Another one is detachment or cynicism toward, whatever role it is, your job, school, caregiving, whatever the case may be, where you're feeling like, who cares? Or I'm just not feeling it. I have a personal example of a time that I was experiencing burnout, and I was talking to a coworker in her office, and she was talking about some work project, and I just said, I don't even care anymore. And she was like, what? Because that is not me. Like, normally I care so much about my work that I am always taking on extra stuff, and I bring a lot of enthusiasm. And at that moment, I realized I was experiencing burnout, because I think that sense of like, who cares? That's a sign. And then also just this feeling that you're less effective, questioning whether you're doing any good, whether you're capable. So some of that kind of self-criticism, but it's a little different than self-criticism. I think it's more just this question of like, am I doing this? Can I do this? And then sometimes, so those are sort of the classic, hallmarks of burnout. But sometimes what you'll see is that then people might start, for instance, using substances or skipping work, or, in the case of parents, just not paying attention to their kids, or if it's a caregiver, just not doing their caregiver duties. And so I think those are the core components of it, but it can trickle into bigger issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm always, since I tend to compartmentalize and overregulating, underregulating, and the burnout, I wonder if there's any research that the predecessors of burnout are the sort of emotion dysregulation, high amounts of anxiety, stress, irritability, things like that. Could those be warning signs that maybe you're getting into the range of burnout, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one I know about from the research, so that's a good question maybe to keep thinking about, but is just chronic stress. And I think stress is part of life, right? We all have it at times, but when it's chronic, and that was the case for me when I was burnt out, I just had a chronic stress in a lot of roles. I wasn't taking breaks. But stress, when you have a relief from whatever's stressing you out, you'll usually feel better, and stress sort of comes and goes. But I think that with a high amount of stress over time, then people will start to, like you said, sort of detach. It's almost like an emotionally avoidant response to it. There's this painful stress response, and over time it kind of wears you down and you just check out. So they're a little different. But yeah, I think chronic stress is absolutely a component of burnout.
So what can people do to prevent this, to take care of themselves? Are there things that you recommend in your office, or advice that you would give to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I have a number of things. I definitely think that sometimes the demand of these stressful roles is such that we feel like we can't take a break. We have to be, perfect at everything and take the weight of the world on our shoulders. So absolutely, and I struggle with this myself, believe me, but finding ways to give yourself a break, to take care of yourself, even if it's small ways, because I think sometimes self-care becomes another, like, oh, I should be going to yoga for an hour and a half and doing all these things, and sometimes that's just not going to happen. Right. But things like eating, sleeping, getting enough rest, moving your body a bit, whatever it is for you, right? Those are important behavioral things that people need to do. I think there's a lot of really solid research about just overwork and how if we don't take breaks, in the long run, we're less effective and it leads to burnout. So those kinds of things are important. I also think making room for your emotional experience, having some awareness of what you're feeling and thinking is really important. I think seeking support is really important. So that could be professional support if it's extreme. But even if it's not, I think knowing the signs and talking to someone, whether it's just a friend or someone that you trust, maybe another person in your field or something like that. I think sometimes people hold it in, and it's crucial. And I think too, it normalizes it, right? That sometimes it is really the context that we're in that's contributing to burnout. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'll give 2 examples if that's okay.
Do.
That are dear to my heart because it's part of my experience and also the work that I do. One is within healthcare, right? So people are just overworked. They sometimes don't feel like they get enough resources and systemic support. I think there can be a culture, it kind of depends on the field, but there can be a culture within medical professions of sort of stoicism and that you should be immune from this kind of thing. And sometimes people feel burnt out and they think, oh, it's me, I'm not resilient enough. I need to be, practicing all these things. Well, actually, I think there's something really important about not blaming the victim here, right? And that it can be that it's kind of like the system is rigged, right?
Yeah.
So that's one example, but that also happens in other workplace environments where maybe people are feeling unappreciated or overworked, or they're feeling like they don't have enough control over their own work or their own environment. The other example I wanted to give is parenting, because I'm a parent myself and I work with a lot of parents who get burned out because that role is demanding and exhausting. I think right now with the pandemic, it's almost like relentless, like you never get a break from it because you can't leave and your kids are home all the time. And what I find is that often parents get this message that they're supposed to be doing everything perfectly, right? Like they have to be this superhero parent.
Right.
And they're not getting support, right? They're left feeling alone with it. They're left feeling like they need to be the one doing all these things just right. And so again, they're often really doing just fine, but they're getting burnt out because they have such demand on themselves and so little support that over time it wears them down. And that's where they get really exhausted.
Something that I'm hearing in both of these scenarios, though, is the shoulding, right? Is the self-judgment, the lack of compassion for themselves, that there's this, so there is some thinking wrapped around this that might catalyze the stressful reaction, because the definition of stress, according to Laszlo, is the perception that the events in the environment that we need to tackle are beyond our internal resources to cope. I'm paraphrasing and ruining that quote radically, but that's generally this idea that we don't feel like we have the resources to handle what's being thrown at us, and or that we should be able to do it better, right, is what I'm hearing.
We're so hard on ourselves, Laura. We're so hard on ourselves. Whatever the domain is, I think everyone can relate to this, that we feel like we should be doing more. We should be doing it just right, whatever it is. Yeah. We should be giving ourselves to the point where we should be taking on more projects. And I think that is absolutely where this sense of self-compassion is really gone, is when you just feel like I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing well enough. I mean, if I work harder, I'll get there. If I do and it's, you're never going to get there, right?
So how do we negotiate? It sounds like we have a dialectic, two extremes going on, right? Pushing ourselves and blame. We're kind of caught between blaming ourselves versus blaming the environment, and neither one of those seems like they're going to be very helpful, right? It's all thinking stuff anyway. So I know that we talked about some ways that people can start being kinder to themselves, or to practice some skills. You were also mentioning all the things that we know. We need to get some more exercise. We need to take a hot bath, take time for yourself, but we don't, right? And that's what I always find is interesting as a behaviorist, right? Why is that we don't do things that I'm sure people are listening and saying, yeah, I know that I should be doing those things for myself. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to show them something they can do for themselves. But the question I'd like viewers to ask themselves right now, if you're feeling burnt out, if you're feeling really stressed, and you know that you need to do some things to take care of yourself, or to get some things from your environment, or make changes in your environment, what's getting in the way? I think the big secret sauce is always like, what's getting in my way? There's something in the automaticity of being an overachiever used to work. We got all these degrees and accolades and things for pushing harder and harder, and then we don't stop because we're thinking we're going to get that same reward somewhere. So I just think it's interesting for people to think about, like, why don't you do things? Why don't all of us? Why don't I stop eating the things I don't want to eat, or why don't I do a million things?
That's too. I mean, last night I thought I should probably either go to bed early or go for a walk or something, because I just felt I could feel that stress in my body with all the news happening and everything. I felt like I could use some self-care, and I did not. I mean, it's harder, easier said than done, right? I mean, I think we sometimes feel almost like we don't have room for it in our lives, and it's really hard to make room.
Or like Brenda, one of our viewers, is saying right now, she's saying, why don't we? Is it guilt? Guilt could be one thing, right? Especially as women. We're supposed to be taking care of everyone else, so that's possible. But I think each person
I hear that
has
a
to ask
lot,
themselves.
Laura, I hear that a lot with caregivers, right? So I've worked a lot with caregivers, often spouses or other caregivers who are taking care of people with medical issues, and they'll feel like, I can't leave. I can't leave to go do that yoga class. I can't go out and have coffee with my friends because I need to be here. I mean, that's just actually sometimes stressful to take that time out. So you go to a yoga class, but you spend the whole time feeling guilty, feeling stressed. Yes, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that, to me, I'm so convinced that if I don't take care of this, I'm no good to anyone. Doesn't mean I don't burn out, as I mentioned earlier. But that's what I always tell people: put the oxygen mask on yourself first, because if you go down, then probably as the woman in the house, the whole house of cards is going down. So,
Yeah.
so we
Well, and
know
I
that.
think when I do manage to take care of myself, it shows. I think I'm able to show up in a way that's much better for everyone. My
Yeah.
clients, my kids, my spouse. Yeah.
So it sounds like we're kind of integrating a value of self-care into this question of burnout. And so I'd love people to think about your own value for self-care and watch out for any of those sneaky little beliefs or autopilot habits that are kind of getting in the way, because that's, for me, why I always think that there's always between, we can give the instruction for all the practices, but there's always going to be that place of willingness that gets in the way somewhere between the commitment and the action to actually do it. So I'd like you all to think out there. Missy has a good, also just not just guilt, but worrying about judgment from other people. Right? That's also something that a lot of people worry, that if I'm taking care of myself, even, it's funny that you say that, Missy. Thank you for that comment. As I said, I know I need to take care of myself, or I'm no good to anyone else. There was a little part of my mind that went like, oh, are people going to think I'm selfish? But it's an important one. We have to take care of ourselves first, because we'll just not be good to other people if we don't take care of ourselves first. So that was a good comment. So I'm sorry if I interrupted you. So I encourage people to look for what's getting in the way. You're worried about judgments from others. You're worried about guilt. You're worried about these things, and still find a way to commit to what you choose works for you. So, Debbie, you were going to share something with us, I think, about like maybe a little practice or something that people might try as a self-care
Sure.
tip.
Should we do it now? Is this okay?
Yeah,
I
just
think we
should.
Kind of a mini practice, because I think part of what we want to do is find ways that are realistic for us, right? So
Totally.
Maybe it's a busy work day. Maybe you're swamped with final exams. Maybe you have just no break in your day and you want to practice self-care. I would almost reframe this to self-kindness. This is just a way to spend 2 minutes being kind to yourself. So should we do it live? Okay.
Yes, let's do it.
So if you're listening, just follow along. You might choose to close your eyes if you want to, just to be able to focus, and just get quiet with yourself for just a moment. Just kind of take a quiet moment. We rarely have in our busy lives. And just see if you can connect with one area of your life that you care deeply about, that is causing you a bit of stress or pain or exhaustion right now, whatever that is for you. Just choose an area. And sort of breathe into it and just make room for your emotions right now. Whatever it is that you're feeling, just allow yourself to feel it. Stress might be there, exhaustion might be there. Just give yourself room to feel what you feel. Notice what's important to you in this area of your life. If there's pain there, there's probably something that you care about. Just look for the why this is important to you. Just reconnecting with the values behind it. And check out the possibility that you might be putting too much extra pressure on yourself to be perfect or to be superhuman. You may or may not be, but just check into that. And if so, just remind yourself that you're human. You don't have to be perfect. See if there's room to go easy on yourself. To recognize that you're doing enough and you don't need to change anything about yourself. And just ask yourself what small kindness you need to be able to keep doing what's important to you. Maybe you need some kind words to yourself or just a breath, a break. Maybe you need some support or some extra sleep. Maybe you need to move your body. And just see if you can find a realistic way to do one small kindness toward yourself today. Just recognizing that life is hard sometimes and you're doing the best you can. And just take a couple more breaths. And then you can open your eyes.
I love that. I hope everyone else enjoyed that too. It's like a mini vacation.
I mean, some of the things we would really do to take a break aren't available to us right now. And so even just taking a moment to turn inward and check in with yourself can feel like that.
It can be super powerful. It could be super powerful. And these are all things that we're just not trained that way as children. We really, it's not on our radar. But I encourage people, if you practice it at home, and we hope you did, notice how you feel differently. You initiated that, right? That we don't necessarily need a pill or an escape hatch from our experience, that leaning into it in this nurturing and supportive way is like rebooting your computer. So I love that one. Thank you for sharing that with us. If viewers want to give any comments on their experience with it, that would be awesome, to help other people know how powerful these practices can be. So formal practice, you know, for those of you who don't know, mindfulness practice was brought into medical practices by John Kabat-Zinn in the 80s, and he developed this whole like long meditation training of 8 weeks. And he'll even say that, you know, while meditation is awesome and it is the most studied way to get there, and it's a great way to keep soothing your nervous system, the goal is not to get great at meditating. The goal is to get great at observing your experience. And what I say, recognizing the relationship between events. Oh, this happened. I tensed. I judged. I felt. I took an impulse. So trigger, you know, bodily sensation, emotion, thought, action, tendency, and that whole spiral starts. So just taking those moments to check in and notice the relationship between events in any given moment. Do the dashboard form that I call it, if you recall from my book, can be super helpful. What were you going to say?
You know, well, I was just going to say that mindfulness practice is one of the leading research-based interventions for burnout. And I'm most familiar with physician burnout. There are whole programs to teach physicians to practice mindfulness, and it's helpful. There's really solid research supporting just even that. Simply having a mindfulness practice and bringing mindfulness into your day helps a lot with burnout. And to me personally, I feel like it's not enough. We also need some reconnection with our values and vitality. We need support and belonging. We need self-compassion. But I think that if you're going to do one thing, probably practicing some mindfulness is very helpful.
Yeah, and I think all of those things kind of, you know, when I do it, at least it blends in there a little bit. I want to actually point out something that Brenda said here. She said that it felt heavy, almost anxious at first while she was practicing. And I think that's important to highlight, because what did I asked earlier, why don't we do things that we know are good for us? So almost everyone knows mindfulness is good for you now. I mean, we might be oversaturated in it, but then Brenda went on to say, then over into it a bit of the acceptance of not being doing. Okay, so she had to get into the acceptance of not doing, and being okay with it for this moment or this day. So again, that hurdle of so we do more of what feels good, we do less of what feels bad. And sometimes when we start practicing mindfulness or meditations, it's uncomfortable. Or it's uncomfortable to stop eating the potato chips. It's uncomfortable to get up and go to the gym. So we have to figure out what are those moments of discomfort that are barriers to doing the self-care practices that will prevent our burnout. See how we have to sort of interrupt that habitual cycle.
I think that's a really good. Yeah, thank you, Brenda. I think that's a really good point. And I would even say what you said about not doing is really important too, because I think sometimes when we're in doing mode, it can be very uncomfortable to pause that. So say I decided I was going to take the afternoon off and go chill. the first thing that would come to my mind is a total freak out about all the stuff I had planned to get done today, right? Like my anxiety would go through the roof. And probably by tomorrow morning, I would feel more refreshed. I'd be actually probably more productive in the long run, but we have to get over that short-term discomfort of stopping the busyness. I think busyness serves a function of making us feel like we're in control or something, but then it just piles on and it gets to be too much.
It definitely does. So the busyness, it's like we're checking the box. We feel some sense of certainty when we were in grad school. For those of us who were in grad school, I would have to force myself. People would have to pry me out of the house or bring me food to see me. Right?
Literally.
Yes, they literally did. And so even during the sort of quarantine, it's very familiar for me. So, and look what I'm doing. I'm doing live casts and I'm keeping busy. And so for viewers, I really encourage you, ask yourself these important questions. What's getting in the way? Like, what beliefs do I hold? What habits am I locked into that are keeping me from engaging in these acts of kindness towards myself?
Now, there's other kinds of burnout as well.
Right, because we have caretaker burnout and not just doctors, but spouses, family members that have or children taking care of an older parent, and that I mentioned to you just a couple days ago that there's this sort of new adult development area, established adulthood that's sort of just after emerging adulthood and just before middle age, where you're sandwiched between caring for your parents, caring for your kids, trying to build your career. Did you just take a deep breath because I was describing? So at the end of the day, it's really being mindful of how burnout is creeping up in our own lives. And that's why you started studying it, right? That's why you've started to blog on it, and you're kind of making this your area now.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in it before, but I told you about that moment when I was in my coworker's office and I just said, I don't even care anymore. And I thought long and hard about that afterwards because I was like, what just happened? That's not normal for me. I kind of connected the dots, realized classic professional burnout. I mean, just like I looked through every single symptom. There's a burnout like quiz or checklist you can take. That I was having it completely. And I think once I became aware of it and I realized that was happening, I realized, okay, now I know what it is. Now I can start changing whatever needs to be changed to reconnect with meaning in this role. And so I think one of the things I really like to do is to help other people get there. I think sometimes even just acknowledging that that's what's happening and reaching out for support or making some sort of change or whatever needs to be done, that's half the battle right there.
And so what you're saying is that you have to look for what change needs to be made, right? In your self-care or even in your environment and your responsibilities. So for our viewers, Absolutely. If you're feeling burnt out, like what can be either, I think of it as like adding and subtracting, right? Like how can I add to my self-care? So the burnout, because I'm taking care of my biology, my body here and my mind. And what really shouldn't be on there, but is just sort of on there because I took it on because it's sort of habitual. That I said yes to another project, or I said, so people start looking at the list of to-dos, and take one off and add a self-care. and it's
and that's, I think, a potential silver lining is that sometimes when you're in a place of feeling overstressed and burnt out and something's not right, you can take a look at what's working and not working in your life. You might need to sometimes make a small change, but sometimes you might need to make a bigger change. I mean, if this is sustainable over time, you might need to change something about one of your roles. You might need to get some extra support. Sometimes it's something small, like a little self-care practice, but sometimes it's something bigger. But I think just stopping and taking a look is huge.
Yeah, and again, you have to be willing to take that look, right? Because that's also painful. Again, we always get caught in these sort of self-sabotaging cycles because of the discomfort of looking at, well, what if I do hate my job? What if I do have to leave my partner? What if something, and when you have that insight, change is always a little painful at first, even if we're asking you to love yourself and take care of yourself and get your needs met. Because like I say, only you can reparent you, and get the help you need to do that. So where can people find you?
I just recently started a blog. It's drdebbysorensen.com. You can find me online. More importantly, though, if this floats your boat, you should definitely check out my podcast that I do with some other psychologists. We've been doing it for a few years, and we talk about all these kinds of things. I have an episode coming out soon about parental burnout with Lisa Coyne. We've done a lot of episodes on self-compassion, values. So go to Psychologists Off The Clock is the name of the podcast. You can find it anywhere you find podcasts, and you can also find us online at offtheclockpsych.com. But you'll find more of this kind of conversation if you check out the podcast.
Awesome. So Psychologists Off The Clock, drdebbysorensen.com. Stay tuned for her growing blog that talks about her personal experiences with and helpful hints for mastering burnout. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, we hope that you'll follow and tune in another time. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much.